Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Project Management Bricolage, brought to you by Wellington. My name is Marisa Silva, I'm a senior consultant at Wellington, and today we are going to talk about the whatever works way, and what does that mean for the world of project management. This webinar has been designed for about 25-30 minutes, and I'm going to share my contact details at the end so that you can send me any questions that you may have. As the objectives of this session, I'm going to give a brief overview of what Wellington is and what we aim to achieve. Also, why do we need to start thinking about project management bricolage? What project management bricolage really is, so this whatever works way. And finally, how you can become what I call a project bricoleur, so applying project management bricolage yourself. So starting with a brief introduction to Wellington. We are a specialist PPM consulting company. We aim to identify what is the DNA of each of the companies, what makes them unique, and deliver project management services that align with three key dimensions: delivery, strategy, and capability. I used to say that if it has to do with project management, it has to do with us. What we aim to do is then to enabling step change in the PPM maturity of our clients. Our services range from the implementation of PMOs to the delivery of training. And by the way, some breaking news that were released today. We now have an APM accredited assurance practitioner course. So good news for you out there. And we also are a gold partner for Microsoft for the delivery and deployment of Project Online, Project Server, and similar project management tools. Amongst our clients, you can see some names here on the screen. We work with a variety of clients ranging from different sizes all over the UK. In terms of our accreditations and partnerships, just to let you know, I mentioned already that we are a Microsoft Gold Partner. We are also APM, the Association for Project Management, the chartered body for the project profession. We are accredited by the APM as well as a training provider, and we are the exclusive partners for the PMO Value Ring here in the UK, a service provided by the PMO Global Alliance, which, by the way, is going to be available to you as part or visible to you in our future PMO event, which I'll talk in a second. We are also part of the Apex Alliance, a group of providers that can deploy different services around your technology, and also exclusive partners for PMOto, service that works with artificial intelligence and big data learning machine to then use the capabilities of Project Online to better serve our clients. Additionally, we do some work around PPM intelligence as well. So I mentioned already the future PMO. So this is the one-day PMO event that is happening on the 4th of October, and for which we are also going to see the best PMO in the world brought to you by the PMO Global Alliance and by Wellington. Additionally, we run an annual survey, the State of Project Management, in association with the APM, with the PMO SIG, Specific Interest Group, and also with the System Thinking SIG. But enough about Wellington and a bit about me now. So for the ones of you who don't know me, something that you need to know is that I'm Portuguese. And that matters because I want to tell you of a Portuguese word. I didn't mention it, but that's actually one of the objectives of today's webinar as well, that you learn a Portuguese word. So this word is desenrascanço. And please don't try to say it, you won't be able to. Or at least I tried with some colleagues in the office and they couldn't. So desenrascanço is a Portuguese word that defines part of the Portuguese culture. And I'm mentioning it because it relies also, or it's very similar to the concept of bricolage that we are going to talk about today. In particular, it shows our improvisation skills and how creative we can be when using bricolage, which we are going to talk in more detail in a second. But you can see immediately on the screen how imaginative we can be and how we can apply then that imagination to project management too. So with that in mind, those are the 4 key areas that we are going to discuss. First of all, talking about the current panorama of project management and what I call the MacDonaldization of project management. Then, why should we settle for one method when there are so many methods, so many toolkits available out there? We are then going to talk in more detail about the whatever works way, so project management bricolage, and the competencies that are required or what you can do right away to start becoming a project bricoler. Starting then with the MacDonaldization of project management. The way I see project management today is very similar to what George Ritzer called the MacDonaldization of society, where we have almost ready to use project management standards and tools. Those are the happy meals of project management, looking for efficiency, calculability, control, predictability. We know that everywhere in the world they will rely on the same definitions, and we want projects to be run fast, in a predictable, in a controlled way. So very much as McDonald's do. However, by having that Happy Meal version of project management, you can also see that sometimes we are faced with what Schnarr and De Veer called a project is a project is a project syndrome. So this is a situation where we are formatted to think in boxes. We like order, we like standardization. And you can see in the picture there how that is also done, how we try to build order into project management, almost creating a sort of myopia in the way that we follow blindly, almost without questioning, as a copy-paste, one can say, of how projects should be run. Let's just take our Happy Meal, our Happy McDonald's meal, and then use it blindly, which doesn't work. In both extremes, now looking at two versions here, we can then see that we have heroic and robotic project managers. And this is an extreme version of it, by the way. So the heroic project manager being that one that doesn't follow any methodology, no control at all or few documentation, very flexible, he runs his projects or her projects by exception, always think outside the box, and typically those are the accidental project managers as well that didn't choose project management as a career and were learning by doing. On the other extreme, we have robotic project managers. Those are the ones that are then formatted to think inside that box. So they follow the methodology blindly. They have an excess of documentation and control, one can say. They are slow and inflexible to respond to changes because they don't know anything else outside management by the book. They are stuck in the box, one can say. And those tend to be the professional project managers. Professional in this sense being taken to the extreme, as I mentioned. As with everything, balance would be in the middle. And in reality, that balance is achieved by understanding what is the fit that you'll need to find in your organization. Best practices are important. Standardization is important. Having standards that we can rely on, like the PMBOK, like Prince2 in this case, like a method, is important. But I always say that best fit practices matter more than best practices. In fact, there's a very interesting research article from Mullally and Thomas about the concept and value of fit in project management, which I strongly suggest. So what it mentions is that standardization is important, as I was saying. However, project management is contextual, and we tend to forget this very often. It depends on your own context, your own culture, and the kind of projects that you manage. So try to force it into a certain position, a certain approach, put it in that box may not lead to the desired results. Likewise, also a research paper from Milosevic and Patanukul identified that standardization leads to good results only to a certain point. If we expand that standardization beyond that point, which they call inflection point, then this actually hampers project success. In the same way, if you are familiar with the Cinefin model from Dave Snowden, you can also see that best practices are actually just part of a wider view of the world. So best practices, they work very well when we have obvious problems, where we can see very clearly what is the cause and the consequence that we can apply. However, the world that we have nowadays is not that obvious, as you have probably noticed. We get more and more complicated projects, a couple of complex ones, and even chaotic ones. And on these ones, best practices are no longer enough. We need to start thinking beyond the traditional frameworks. So here we need to start thinking about emergent practices, trying something new, or even, if we are in a chaotic status, novel practices. So best practices are useful, but don't hang too much on what they mean. There is life beyond best practices. Likewise, or following, one size doesn't fit all. And it's very important then that we know how to tailor those best practices or even trying emerging practices to the kind of projects that we have in front of us. So looking at the complexity of different projects, different kinds of governance and control may be required. The example on the screen is very simple, so it just shows different sizes, small, medium, and large, and then how you would then apply different controls to projects which have different needs. Like for instance, if you have a project which is, let's say, 1 month and 10K of budget, probably it doesn't require plenty of stage gates as billion-dollar project lasting for a couple of years. So the number of stakeholders involved, the controls in place, the frequency of reporting will change. And the way how your PMOs, the project management departments set up those controls then should vary accordingly, should be tailored. In fact, tailoring is a principle, but is often forgotten. We just go for the copy and paste version, which is typically quicker to implement, but then will not result in the most desirable outcomes. So you may be wondering how then to apply this tailoring. My suggestion would be to start with a complexity questionnaire. Complexity, as we saw from the previous slide, being then that key differentiator that helps us identify if we need best practices or if we need novel practices. So having a complexity questionnaire where we can identify what is the complexity involved will then allow us to build what is called the tailoring matrix, defining what reports are needed, what controls, which controls, and as well as stage gates and so on, governance, etc. Additionally, you may want to consider some other approaches. One of them, very well known, is the diamond approach, also from Schnarr and De Veer, which considers 4 dimensions, the NCTP model. So novelty, complexity, technology, and pace. Additionally, Agile is very well rounded still, so something that you may want to consider here would be to identify if the scope can be fixed or if it can be estimated. And the same thing for budget and time, being this a key differentiator of traditional approaches in managing projects. But I don't want to talk too much about Agile. I appreciate that it's still very trendy, very fashionable, but I don't understand it as a silver bullet, and it's not the key focus for today anyway. It's one of the areas that you should consider, but it's not the only one. In fact, what we see, and this is applicable to any method, any approach, is that every time there's a new kid on the block, we have a funny or interesting situation with expectations over time. So the Gartner Hype Cycle really shows this scenario, which we also had with Agile as an example, where We had that peak of inflated expectations, and I believe now that we are in the middle of delusionment and enlightenment, trying to find that plateau of productivity. And this is a scenario that happens every time. So nowadays, I'm seeing the same situation with SAF, with less, and with other methods that are available out there. What I mean here is that we don't need to reinvent the cycle, the wheel every time. We need, on the contrary, to work with what we already have. And in that sense, I ask, why should we settle for just one method? Imagine, for instance, that you are doing some improvements in your office at home, and you call the handyman to help you with that work. How happy would you be if that handyman only brought, let's say, a hammer or a drill? Do you think that would be sufficient? Probably not. So why do we still insist on focusing just one method or one approach when it's so many out there that can be of use? Like in project management, like in life, being fluent in different languages can help. So here, by knowing what is available, by knowing what other options you can consider, would be able to deliver better chances of success and equip you with the capabilities, the competency of defining which one would suit your project, your context better. In fact, also PMI, the Project Management Institute, mentioned in a recent report that organizations with some maturity in their value delivery capabilities, they use all approaches to project delivery rather than focusing on just one. And we have seen a lot of articles on bimodal approaches or hybrid approaches. But this is going one step further. This is now combining predictive, iterative, hybrid, and even next practices towards value delivery. So project management bricolage, to summarize what that means. Project management bricolage is then the combination of known tools that already exist, that we are familiar with, and routines that are at hand to solve problems that are unexpected. And this is typically done looking within the organization. So rather than searching outside, we actually use the knowledge from the experts, the people that are on the field delivering projects, to identify what would be those unique attributes, that fit element that sometimes is missing in our projects, to what would be that approach that best suits them. So the whatever works approach, as I like to call it. Project Management Bricolage then refers to using those resources that already exist, that are to hand, to resolve unforeseen events. And contrary to the role of the engineer, which, if you are interested, Levi-Strauss has some interesting articles on this. Contrary to the role of the engineer, the bricolayer is the one that can then use those competencies, that critical thinking, to solve unplanned problems. And this is done using what is known as tacit knowledge, knowledge that already exists, that is not always made explicit, and which is very often undervalued. Your current employees, your project management teams, they know the best how to run projects. So do not neglect that knowledge. Actually make use of it. Now, project management bricolage is very closely related to improvisation, or, as you may remember, to desenrascanço. However, while improvisation is much more intuitive, one can say, bricolage instead can be planned. Okay? However, the more improvisation we put into an activity, the bigger the chance of bricolage occurring, in the way that we may be then combining different elements to make that improvisation work. Also very important, I'm not saying that whatever works method is an excuse for bad planning. Not at all. Okay? So planning still needs to occur, and planning is part of project management bricolage. Project Management Bricolage is not a random or a trivial or just doing experimentation. Quite the opposite. It involves using that knowledge to identify what would be the best approach. Okay? So it requires a specific mindset and a project culture that facilitates that mindset to occur. Finally, I'm not dismissing the importance of best practices. As I mentioned before, best practices, they are important and they are useful. However, best fit practices, they work much better in the way that they can then use that mindful, that creative, that improvisation mindset to deliver better results. It's a bit like combining different Lego pieces, which you assemble, you try to find out to create new structures. Exactly the same with bricolage in project management. The concept of bricolage is new to project management, but has been widely investigated in a profession in particular, and that is the profession of firefighters. I know that in project management we use the notion of firefighting a lot, but this is actually a different concept now. So according to research, firefighters, they are very good with bricolage in the way that if they did some tests and if firefighters, when confronted, when exposed to a crisis, if they were just to follow the routines, the procedures, the standard operating procedures in the organizations, they would not be able to have as better results as the ones that just follow their gut, that they had that tacit knowledge and made use of them. So firefighting being an example here on how to be creative and use resources at disposal. And as you can see below in that formula for improvisation, bricolage is actually a key part of improvisation combined with intuition, following your gut, knowing, making use of that tacit knowledge, also with creativity and imagination. So playing with those Lego pieces and see what would work better. Now that we know what bricolage is, let's talk a bit on how you can become project manager bricolager. The first element, and probably the most important one, is about applying critical thinking. As I mentioned, there is that tacit knowledge that we can use, but the tacit knowledge should not be used randomly. Here, if we have individuals who are beginners in project management, the PMO can play a pivotal role in the way that it will provide some guidance. However, for teams who are already experienced, they are in a better position, better than anyone else, to identify what would work better. And I have some real examples here. So I was part of a project recently where we were combining different elements. And we had a discussion within the team of what would be the best combination of approaches to deliver the different results. So we were following some principles of Agile as a philosophy. So we had, for instance, self-empowered teams where there was the role of the project manager didn't exist in that project. But we had also some governance, which one can say resemble what would be the governance of Prince 2 without that role of project management then, but still some governance in place. And then we were using a Kanban board for the management of our project work. Finally, for reporting, we were using demos. So there was no status report, contrary to other projects in the same organization, but we were using a different approach. So combining different toolkits to make value visible, to make whatever works the best approach there. So critical thinking allowing then the project teams themselves to identify what would work best. Because at the end of the day, we don't want people to be process experts. Or actually, we want people to be those process experts. What we don't want them to be is process slaves, following that process, not knowing if it is the best one or not. So they know best. Then very important, I mentioned already that there needs to be a culture in the organization that facilitates that mindset. So mindset, it's much more important than the tool set. The tools can vary, but it is the mindset that will make that change sustainable. And I'm always impressed by how when companies invest in training, they start by investing in the tool set or in the skill set, but they neglect the power of investing in the mindset, which is typically where we see transformational change, where we have that organizational focus. Likewise, as you can see in the talent triangle, in this case from PMI, the technical project management, which would be involved in this case in project management bricolage, is just a part of what are the skill set, the competencies that are required to be a professional project manager, oriented to the delivery of value for the business. Here, very important then to say that investing in that mindset should be done from the inside. Like with that tacit knowledge where you use the resources that are at hand, that mindset should also, or that change, should also be done internally. Here it's worth mentioning the analogy of the egg, in the way that if you see life, actually if you break an egg from the outside, it means that life no longer exists. However, if the egg breaks from the inside, that's a good sign. It's a sign of life emerging. So this works exactly in the same way, bringing life to that change by doing it from the inside of the organization. Other aspect that you can consider in becoming a project manager bricolaire is the concept of MVB. We all know MVP, minimum viable product. This one, MVB, stands for minimum viable bureaucracy, and it represents the least amount of structure and process that we can get away with to avoid total chaos. So as you can see in the picture, is that fine balance between chaos on one hand and bureaucracy on the other hand. So if we are to combine different approaches, the more streamlined we can be, the better, because that will then focus on the integration points and allow us to then see value being released much earlier. So the least amount of structure and process to still make things work. And finally, very important element, organizational learning. So we all know that plans and reality are not always aligned, right? And deviating from the plan is typically seen as a dysfunction, something that we don't want to happen. We like order, we like structure, we like, as project managers, to have a plan that works. Although plans are typically fate-driven, one can almost say. So no one likes to be outside that norm. So there comes a moment when the PM needs to then make a decision. Will I do some improvisation? Will I apply some bricolage, some creativity? Will I be able to work with the time pressure or not? And if we don't, then if the PMs improvise, but they don't like to admit it because of that perception of dysfunction between the misalignment of plan and reality, what happens is that that information, that result of the improvisation, either positive or negative, will be lost. So in that sense, it's very important that we create and facilitate that organizational learning, creating what is called an organizational memory, so that that outcome that is generated from the improvisation can be recorded and can be used for others. So using also that concept of organizational memory to work on facilitate the work of others. So just as a recap, three key elements, or four key elements if you consider also the mindset. So we are talking about employing critical thinking, also looking at the mindset over the tool set. So we don't want just a handyman with a hammer. We want actually a project manager who is fluent in all the different languages of project management and who is equipped with that critical judgment to identify what combination of approaches would work best for his project. Then we have the concept of minimum viable bureaucracy, to allow us then to work in that fine balance between bureaucracy and chaos, a bit as projects. And finally, organizational learning, which can be facilitated by a structure like PMO's, project management offices. And that's all that I had to share with you today. So the concept of project management bricolage and how you can apply it in practice and become a project bricoler yourself. I'm now going to share my contact details so that you can share any questions, any feedback, any comments that you would like. So please feel free to contact me at marissa.silva@wellington.co.uk, and I hope to see you very soon at Future PMO on the 4th of October. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.